You are listening to MCC Votes and Seats, the podcast series of the Center for Political Science of Matthias Corvinus Collegium. We provide election insights with experts and politicians. This time, we dive into the depths of Macedonian politics on the occasion of the recent presidential and legislative elections that were held in the country on the 8th of May 2024. We are privileged to have Dr. Marko Troshanovski, president of the Skopje-based think tank Institute for Democracy, Skopje. Dr. Troshanovski specializes in public opinion research, political culture, media, and political communication. Dear Marko, it's great to have you with us. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation to this podcast.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm really glad to use this first opportunity to be a guest at your podcast.
Let's get it started. In North Macedonia, you had the 11th parliamentary election and 7th presidential poll since the country's independence. The main contest was between the then ruling Social Democrats, SDSM, led by Dimitar Kovachevski, and the major opposition right-wing VMRO DPMNE party, led by Christian Mickovski. Could you give us an insight into the background, ideologies, and program of the major political parties and players that ran in the ballot?
A little historical background, a very brief historical background on the political party contest that actually hasn't changed much since the country gained independence from Yugoslavia in 1991. So two major parties emerged at that period, one as a successor of the Communist Party, as everywhere more or less in the socialist world or post-socialist world. That were the Social Democrats in our case. And the other branch of the political spectrum, a demo-Christian, so to say, national, slightly, People's Party, as they want to declare themselves, VMRO DPMNE. In that sense, the political battle was divided between the left, represented by the Social Democrats, and the right, represented by VMRO DPMNE. Macedonia has also a significant minority, Albanian minority, which was represented by different political parties, and the political representation was quite fragmented until 2001, when after the brief civil war conflict that Macedonia experienced, where Albanian community rebelled for greater rights, DUI, Democratic Union for Integration political party was formed that emerged from these rebel structures. And since then, they are a part of they dominated the political landscape until these last elections. So more or less the contest in the past 20 years, since 2001, is between Social Democrats and Demo-Christians that represent more or less the Macedonian electorate, ethnic electorate, and DY that represented the Albanian minority. There were others, of course, smaller Albanian parties, but they were never in a position to seriously compete with DY. Nevertheless, after these 20 years of interchangeably governing the country between the Macedonian parties and the Albanian party being a constant coalition partner, this spring actually, had a new change of government where the DY was overthrown after the 20 and more years rule in the country, which created a lot of grievances, frustrations among both Macedonian and ethnic Albanian population due to many indications for high-level corruption, partization of the state administration, and so forth and so on, which remained untackled by the judicial branch of the political system. So there was no any significant judicial trial or process against their officials. So after this election, they are most probably will become opposition, since the newly emerged Albanian parties created a coalition, very loose one though, but still coalition that is now in negotiation with the VMRO DPMNE as a winner within the Macedonian bloc, and most likely will form the next government. With regard to political ideology, it is fair to say that although, as everywhere in the democratic world, these borders in terms of ideologies, values, and political programs are somehow obsolete. I would say as year passed by, parties more and more, both parties, Macedonian parties, shifted from their initial political settings in terms of values and programs, and more or less were focused on pragmatic offer, so to say. It is also worth mentioning that within the Albanian bloc, which traditionally is part of the government, regardless of the fact that parliamentary majority can be achieved without them, it is a convention that they are part of the government as they represent a significant ethnic minority of 25%, as I said. There is no party that belongs to any party family within Europe. So there is no clear ideological determination by the leadership. They are more focused on ethnic policies based on improving of the situation, both economic-wise, collective right-wise, political representation-wise of the ethnic Albanian community. So unfortunately, the spectre is divided more or less between parties that are ethnically based in their functioning and their political offer, rather than based on civic concept of society, which is a reason for many polarizations in the society, but we can talk about this afterwards. On these elections, on the last elections, the main clash was between the narrative that the opposition VMRO created, that the country was captured by a corrupted elite of the government, run by the Social Democrats and the long-standing government partner DY, as I said. Their slogan was "Macedonia, again yours," implying that the country was stolen from somebody, and that now a citizen needs to restore the ownership of the country and to become masters of their own destiny and their own political process again. On the other side, so this was the main pillar. The European integration and the European perspective of the country was present, but not in the primary focus of the discourse created during the election campaign. On the other side, SDSM, incumbent party up until these elections, and DY narrative was around the European perspective primarily, as there is a very high consensus regarding the European membership as a strategic goal of the country, more than 65 now, and in the past, more than 85% of the population support this strategic goal, and it is usually a standard topic on the political agenda and during the election campaign. But faced with many corruption scandals, with the stalemate in the EU integration process created by the Bulgarian veto and the Greek veto before, then many corruption scandals that remain untackled, it was very difficult for the ruling Social Democrats to focus on other achievements, because there were very few. And their main promise was that they will remain on the European path, that the opposition tries to shy away from the EU values and the geostrategic interests of the country. So they somehow neglected and omitted all their shortcomings during their 7-year rule, and focused on a quite vague promise that we will continue with the European integration of the country. And in the Albanian bloc, the narrative on there is a very strong emotions against Russia. The entire discourse and the narrative was designed around this topic, that Russia is threatening the country through hybrid warfare, political infiltration, implying that VMRO DPMNE is a proxy of the Russian interests and influence in the country. Their party slogan was "No to Russia, yes to Europe," primarily, and also because they face the same shortcomings in the governance that I mentioned that are valid for SDSM, for the Social Democrats. They also did not very much capitalize on achievements, but rather on topics and narratives of geopolitical symbolicism that Russia should be kept away, and that's why electorate should support DY, because they are protector of the Euro-Atlantic value system and the geopolitical interests of the country. And the Albanian opposition, I would like to also emphasize this, that now most likely will become the new government coalition partner. They It is composed of three much smaller parties in terms of support, but they managed to achieve significant, even better number of votes compared to the Albanian incumbent party. Their narrative was mainly focused, of course, on the rule of law, anti-corruption measures, and improving the economy of the country, which pretty much deteriorated in the past few years following the corona crisis and all the crises that succeeded it.
Taking a look at the results of the legislative election, the right-wing opposition coalition, led by VMRO DPMNE, had a landslide victory by gathering 45% of the vote and 58 seats in the parliament, which were 3 mandates short of a majority in the Sobranie, the National Assembly. The incumbent center-left coalition, led by SDSM, as you mentioned, lost 28 seats and collapsed to 16% of the vote. The SDSM and its For a European Future coalition ended up gaining 18 parliamentary mandates. The DUI, the Albanian party with the European Front coalition, also moved down to 18 seats, while the other Albanian coalition, VLEN, finished with 14 seats. And we had the left-wing nationalist Levica, the left, that gained 6 mandates, and the left-wing populist For Our Macedonia movement, or SNAM, led by the mayor of Kumanovo, that won another 6 seats in the Sobranie. Marko, how would you assess the importance and the main conclusions of the legislative elections results in terms of North Macedonia's EU accession perspectives, the fight against corruption, as you put it, and the rule of law endeavors?
3 topics emerge as the most important one. First is the economic recovery, revival of the country, private sector primarily. Then it is the rule of law and the fight against corruption. And the third one is the European integration. One can say that this is strange because EU integration for years was the primary interest and preference of the voters. But as I said, faced with the constant blockage of the Macedonian progress in the EU integration, this support slowly deteriorated, still relatively high, but deteriorated to 65%, as I mentioned. There are 2 smaller parties that also gained significant support from the voters and managed to establish parliamentary group. This is the anti-establishment, anti-NATO party Levica, which is pretty much mobilizing voters based. It's a strange hybrid of leftist idea with populist right-wing mobilization arguments and so forth. They managed to almost triple their presence in the parliament compared to the previous parliamentary composition. And they are also arguing that the country should disperse its portfolio, economic portfolio and international relations portfolio, and not focus only on US and EU, but consider other options as the Euro-Asian Union and BRICS alternatives. The other branch, SNAM, as you mentioned, was actually emerged from the disappointed social democrat structures. It contributed significantly to the election outcome for the social democrats. It took away many of the disappointed voters, and it contributed to the historical collapse of the social democrats. They achieved historical low support at the elections. The European agenda is high among all other main political parties. The difference is between how to achieve the continuation of the negotiations with EU. Social Democrats were ready to make any concessions in order to start the EU negotiations, including the Albanian parties, whereas VMRO DPMNE were much more reserved and asked for any type of other arrangements that could secure that the dignity of the people is preserved. What do I mean with this? There was a precedent in the European negotiation framework offered to the country that was not a case in any other EU accession process before, where a bilateral dispute between Bulgaria over symbolic historical issues, identity revisions, and denials of Macedonian authentic ethnogenesis, linguistic and ethnogenesis, was put as part of a condition within the negotiation framework, meaning that if Macedonia does not progress in the bilateral dispute with Bulgaria, it will be assessed as a failure to deliver on good neighboring relations and bilateral agreements, and it was put as a condition within the negotiation framework. Even more, putting a Bulgarian minority in the constitution was set as a criteria to unlock the second phase of the start of negotiations with EU, conditioning them with the interest of a single European member state. First it was Greece with the name issue, now is the Bulgaria that is actually saying, to put it more bluntly, that you should agree on our understanding and concept of history, where your country and your people, meaning Macedonia, were actually Bulgarians before the World War II, and the language was actually a Bulgarian dialect, which is very problematic, of course, for the people and for the nation that just a few years ago changed its name only to achieve strategic goals such as NATO membership and opening of UN negotiations. So it is a very troublesome period for any party that wants to devote to the EU agenda to get public support with this type of conditions. And Social Democrats and the Albanian party say, okay, we have to sacrifice again this, and during the process of negotiation, we will see how it will go. Basically, this is their position. And VMRO DPMNE says, no, stop, the process will actually be counterproductive if we agree to discuss these irrational topics. And instead of democratization of the country through negotiation process with EU, reforms and achieving Copenhagen criteria, we will constantly discuss on which historical figure is, whether he was Bulgarian or Macedonian, and what happened 300 years ago. So this is basically almost mission impossible, in which current VMRO DPMNE position stands, because they are saying we need guarantees that Bulgaria will not block or further condition our progress in the chapters during the negotiation process. We want merit-based process, but the truth is that nobody can give this type of guarantees to VMRO DPMNE, and that Bulgaria and, of course, other EU member states throughout the entire process can misuse the process to pursue their own national interests.
Staying with this name issue with Greece, as I mentioned in the introduction, on the very same day you had presidential elections as well, and the second round actually of the 2024 presidential election that was also won by the VMRO DPMNE candidate, Dr. Gordana Siljanovska-Davkova, who actually her election was and victory was overshadowed by her decision to use Macedonia in her opening speech rather than the new constitutional name Republic of North Macedonia, as agreed in the 2018 Prespa agreement negotiated with Greece. Was the presidential election campaign different from the parliamentary one? What were the major issues and the most interesting facts about the contest for the head of state position?
The major downside of the previous President Pendarovski was that he agreed on this type of negotiation framework that I just elaborated before. People were really dissatisfied for this move, although he was very critical on this document before he accepted it. And also he signed a legislative piece on the criminal law that actually significantly reduced penalties for misuse of public office. In this way, many state officials, past and future ones, that are misusing money from public tenders, so just to give one example, are faced with penalties that are smaller than if someone steals, let's say, a TV set from a store. So this also more or less amnesty that the political parties proposed in the legislative process for the public officials, and that was accepted by the president, together with his acceptance of the EU negotiation framework, are the two things that actually decided his fate on these elections, although his mandate, truth to be told, was very decent and one of the best, in my opinion, from all other presidents we had in the past. Again, in line with what I previously said, the main focus of the President Pendarovski during the campaign was, again, EU integration. We must continue on the European path regardless of the obstacles we face in bilateral issues and regardless of the way EU decision-making process is designed, we don't have another option. EU is the best world of all possible worlds for North Macedonia. This was his narrative mainly. It is worth to say that the institution of the president in North Macedonia has very few jurisdictions, cannot offer anything significant in the election campaign except this type of arguments dealing with broader topics of geopolitical relevance. On the other side, the current president, Ms. Gordana, she was in the line with the VMRO DPMNE narrative that she will not abide strictly and unconditionally to the obligations that derive from the Prespa agreement with regard to the use of the name North Macedonia in all type of communications, because the Prespa agreement does not explicitly forbids that in the personal domain space and in the verbal communication, North Macedonia must be used. So there is a creative interpretation on the side of VMRO DPMNE to use the word Macedonia, the name of the country Macedonia, in verbal communication and for internal usage, for internal purposes. And this is why during the inauguration ceremony, although she signed formal document, formal oath with the name North Macedonia, so she formally, de jure, accepted the name. When she made the oath verbally, she did not pronounce the adjective North in that time, which of course created big tsunami in the international community that is even still very much concerned that VMRO can actually ruin bilateral agreement, the Prespa agreement, that the both United Nations, USA, European Union worked so hard for 20 years to be reached. These reservations are still present. Having in mind that European elections are coming, both in Greece and in Bulgaria, it was perfect time for revive the name issue again and to mobilize voters for the forthcoming election.
Thank you. And finally, let's take a look at the electoral political geography landscape. What are the major divides in the society? Are there any differences between urban and rural attitudes, or the younger and the older electorate, or among the different ethnicities as far as the political preferences and behavior are considered?
Yes, I wouldn't say there is a major difference in terms of urban-rural division, partly because the migration from the villages to cities in Macedonia is so severe that very few rural regions remain populated. The most significant division is on ethnic grounds, of course, and there are some observable variations in terms of age. Young population is much more disillusioned with EU. And if you trace down the support for EU throughout age structures, young people less and less find EU credible or good intentioned in the offer they are giving to the Western Balkan in general and North Macedonia in particular. On the other side, they of course would like the migration urge is very strong among the young population, so they are willing to go to and live abroad rather than stay here, which is totally opposite than the older generations of voters in the country. They are more and more nationalist also, the young people, as they were faced with, and they grew up in the setting around cheap populism, both on the side of Macedonian populist opinion makers and parties, and with the constant bullying of Greece and Bulgaria, which inevitably backfired in creating stronger nationalist urge on the other side. So more nationalist and more anti-European, if I may say so, although the majority is still not in this spot. But compared to older citizens, this is the situation. With regard to ethnic divisions, the country has a serious gap in the perception of the political reality and the concepts for the political design of the country when it comes to Macedonian ethnic Albanian citizens. 2001, there was a brief conflict that introduced some social democracy elements within the country, mainly, of course, political affirmative action and proportional political representation of minorities in all institutions in terms of employment. And also within the decision-making process, when legislative pieces are passed that concern language, history, symbols, flags, and so forth of the ethnic communities, then a so-called budgetary majority, we call it budgetary majority, a second majority from the minorities is needed in order to pass a certain legislative piece, in order to avoid majorization from the predominant ethnic Macedonian. However, ethnic Albanian parties still do not want to redesign their political offer around civic idea. A country as a unity of citizens based on individual rights regardless of their ethnic background. Although the condition of ethnicities and smaller ethnic groups in the country is significantly improved, the perception on the Macedonian side is that Albanians want to redefine the state, that they are working for binational state rather than unitarian state for everybody. Parallel institutions in the system are focus of their political action in terms of having separate Academy for Sciences of Albanians, having separate Academy of Arts and Sciences for Macedonians, having a separate national television channel for one ethnic community, having a separate for the other one. This is the major concern of the Macedonians when it comes to multi-ethnic coexistence and loyalty toward the state. Truth to be told, the surveys show constant improvement of social cohesion indicators in terms of loyalty towards the state of the ethnic Albanian population, which of course is normal because their situation significantly improved in terms of proportional representation and collective rights in the country. The Albanian language was introduced as the second official language of the country. There is a formal education process for all the Albanians, for the Albanian students, of course, and so forth and so on. But still, many Albanian politicians do not recognize the national anthem. They do not recognize the national flag, as it was not consensually adopted, and so forth. There is also one intra-ethnic division between the ethnic Macedonian campus, and this is the strong polarization created by the very narrative of the Macedonian political representatives in the parliament, the main political actors, VMRO and SDSM. So this is a polarization that is based on the perception that whoever agrees to EU conditions is a national traitor, because certain identity concessions most probably have to be made and already were made with the name change. So once the Macedonians that supported the name change are denominated as traitors, and vice versa, those that are pro-EU and pro-solution oriented with regard to the Bulgarian dispute and the Greek dispute perceive the others as very strong nationalists, people that are not aware of the context in which Macedonia operates in the geopolitical and the regional context, and that are dragging down the future of the country. So there is this strong polarization in this segment. Although the frustration from the 7-year rule of the previous government and ethnic narratives that DY promoted that has nothing to do with national unity and very much favorized the Albanian community created a strong Albanian nationalist impulse within the Albanians in Macedonia, which backfired for the Macedonians, and that's why VMRO DPMNE and Gordana Siljanovska achieved this big victory, as we could witness with the last elections, because people felt, not always, of course, rightly, justifiably, they felt neglected in their country because of these ethnic arguments that the Albanian Coalition Party, which was a kingmaker, although a minority stakeholder in the government, they were a kingmaker. So they had a lot of power, and they overtook the entire process by themselves, very often ignoring the needs, many times symbolic needs of the majority Macedonian population.
And Marko, personally, what do you think was the main lesson, if any, of the 2024 elections in North Macedonia?
Several cycles election cycles in a row, the last 7-8 cycles, including local, presidential, parliamentary elections, they are free and fair. So very few remarks, I would say marginal ones, are given on the side of the ODHR monitoring missions and the international community on the way elections are are conducted. This is a good sign that at least there is a stability of the institutions and that the democratic process is functioning. And this was reaffirmed with the last elections, and this is worth noting. The main lesson here is with this election is that whoever party comes to power or makes a coalition, regardless of whether it is ethnic Albanian or Macedonian party, ethnic issues are always not a useful thing to bet on, because sooner or later it will backfire for the proponents of this type of narratives.
Dr. Marko Troshanovski from the Institute for Democracy Skopje, we are rather grateful to you for sharing your most thought-provoking and informative insights about the presidential and legislative elections in North Macedonia. I believe we managed to provide a quite comprehensive summary about the Macedonian political developments. We truly appreciate your kind contribution.
It was a pleasure. Thank you very much, and I'm open for any type of questions in the comments of the podcast. I will be more than glad to answer them, and thank you, Balint, once more for this opportunity.
Thank you. So we saw that North Macedonia managed to solve its disputes with ethnic Albanians by signing the Ohrid Agreement, named after a lake located between Macedonia and Albania. Then in 2018, they settled the dispute with Greece by signing the Prespa Agreement, another lake located between Greece and North Macedonia. So I believe once you dig another lake on the Bulgarian border, the Skopje-Sofia disagreement will be solved as well, or at least that's what I wish to you for the sake of a speedy realization of a well-deserved EU accession.
Thank you very much for the support. I hope things will unfold in this direction. I mean, it is a good point that now Hungary takes on the presidency with the Council, and as they are part of the same political family with the ruling party VMRO DPMNE, maybe we can expect certain advancement in the process.
We hope for the best. Dear listeners, you have been listening to the latest episode of the Votes and Seats podcast series of Matthias Corvinus Collegium's Center for Political Science. Thank you for your kind attention. Stay tuned for our next episode. Take care. Goodbye.